Good day. This is chapter 3 of Ship of Faith, and it's called the Doldrums, but let me just fill you in on the first few chapters. The Ship of Faith took off, and the captain was decided to drive the ship right into the center of a storm. His navigator complained, but the captain said, faith cannot be tested unless you go through the storms of life. But during the storm, the main mast sail became unfurled, and the bosun went and hid, whose job it was to get it fixed. And the only one available was the first mate, and he decided that he would go up and that he would fix it. And when he went up, the storm caught hold of him, and his hands were pierced onto pegs, and his feet were pierced by the pegs, and he was crucified on the main mast. The next day he was taken down. Everybody looked at the captain. How could you allow this to happen? And it turned out that it was his only son, the first mate. At captain's table after the storm, there was great interest to the cabin boy. He wanted to know what was going on. So he made sure that he was in the room the night before, bringing ahead all the utensils, all the drinks, all the food that he could think of that would not spoil during the night, so that he would be able to be there for report and hear most of what was going on. At report, each officer was to give an account of their responsibilities and how they had carried them out, or not, during the storm. The performance of most of the crew was exemplary until the footloose on the mainsail took place. At that point, the captain looked toward the bosun and asked, "Do you have anything to say for yourself? You clearly refuse to obey a direct order from your captain." The bosun tried to think of an answer that would deflect the blame away from himself and onto somebody else. In no way would he admit that fear took over and that he, at that moment, ran to be undercover. For fear so overwhelming, it caused him to run and hide. He refused to be seen as a coward, though, in front of all these men, all these officers. So racing thoughts filled his mind. He could say he hadn't heard the orders, maybe. After all, he heard the captain himself admit that it would be suicide to go up there. The bosun carefully chose his response, and he said this to the captain: "Captain, I knew that it would be suicide for me to go up there because of my limited experience. So I went below to find a crewman I knew could accomplish the task. But when we popped the hatch open, we noticed the first mate had already started climbing to secure the sail. So we immediately battened down the hatches to avoid more water coming down into the bilge." The captain then stared directly at the bosun's eyes and said, "Can this crewman verify your claim?" The bosun was taken back by the captain's question and became defensive. To challenge an officer in such a way was to throw dispersion on his character and his honor. However, at the same time, the bosun knew that the captain was looking clearly into his soul as if he could know the truth, and somehow was hoping that the bosun would be honest. But instead, the bosun burned with indignation and lied blatantly. And he said, "Of course he can, sir." With that response, the captain quickly cut the tension and addressed the steward. "How are our supplies, steward?" "Sir, this is the area where I am afraid the storm has hit us the hardest. Most of our water kegs either were smashed open or became contaminated with salt water. As much of our food supplies have also been drenched. Unless we begin to ration our supplies, all we have left is 1 week's worth of food." Because of this, the captain ordered that half rations be placed out until further evaluation, and continued inquiring about the conditions off the ship after the storm. Lieutenant, what of the rigging, the sails, and the hardware? With that question, the boatswain got up from the table, abruptly asserting to the captain, "Excuse me, sir, I have work to do down below." "I suppose you do," said the captain, knowing quite well what was going on. The boatswain grumbled something on his way out that only the cabin boy could hear. "How dare the captain ask the lieutenant to make the state of the sail and the rigging? That is my job." Indignant, the boatswain went to seek out a crewman that he could bribe that would shore up his story. Meanwhile, the lieutenant listed numerous repairs that needed to be made, of which most of them he figured could be jury-rigged enough to make the ship windworthy again. He felt it would take just weeks to accomplish. But because of the limited supplies, the captain inquired, "Can you make us windworthy in less than a week, please? I fear we've sustained a great deal of loss, and with rationing of supplies from the storm, we may have a lot of scuttle on our hands." The final officer report was from the master of arms, who was responsible for the discipline on the ship. When asked, he said, "Captain, I'm afraid my list of infractions was on the ship's slate, and it was washed clean by the storm." "Well, sort of." "Officer, what do you mean, sort of?" said the captain. "The master of arms was responsible for the ship's discipline, assisted by the ship's corporals, and a written list of all offenses by the crew were on a large piece of slate secured to the main mast for all to view." "Well, sir, I thought I had covered the slate well with canvas before the storm to avoid it getting wet. However, when the foremast crossbeam pierced your the first mate's side, his blood ran down the mast, and it pooled on top of the heavy canvas until it moved in such a way that it came down and it washed away all the crew's infractions." Well then a smile came across the captain that most people would not understand why he would smile at the thought of the blood of his son running down. But he said, "This is what we need. We need a clean slate. Men, may I propose a toast this night to the first mate who gave his life that all those on board might live, who indeed wiped the slate clean of all infractions." Whew. With that toast, the officers departed. The last to leave was the navigator. Pausing a moment, he made a request. "Captain, may I have your permission to point out something to you that you may have overlooked?" The captain sat back down at the table and leaned forward attentively. "Of course, navigator. I am always here for my crew. You know I will listen to your request. What is it?" "Captain, who is going to fill the first mate's position?" After a few moments, the captain reached out towards the officer, placed his hand comforting on his shoulder. "Navigator, no one could ever fill the first mate's position. However, I understand your concern. For the time being, I am going to have the lieutenant take over the position's job, but not with the title. And then, after the voyage is over, I will appoint someone as first mate." Daybreak welcomed the ship with a blazing hot sun and a breathless calm that hung in the air. The navigator had finished this morning calculation of where they were, met with the captain on top deck. The storm had pushed the ship further south than expected. "Captain, I'm afraid that our position puts us right in the middle of the doldrums. A lot of us are in the doldrums. It's the equatorial calm between prevailing currents and winds. A troubled expression appeared on the captain's face. I know what the doldrums are, navigator, and I certainly know what that means for us right now in our circumstances. Over the next 3 days, the heat and the rationing of supplies, not to mention that all the toilet paper was gone and the eggs, they began to take its toll on the crew, and their tongues swelled while their stomachs roared for lack of food. However, the dead stillness put the crew on edge. For without movement, how would they ever get to a harbor to restock the ship? The bosun saw this as an opportunity to get back at the captain for what he believed was righteous indignation for casting dispersion on his honor, and then going above him and report to that lieutenant. He murmured to himself, I can't believe he went to the lieutenant asking him about the condition of the sails and rigging. That's my responsibility, in front of the other crew members at that. And to the bottom of low, that is the bottom, who does the captain think he is? On board, there are those known for their quietness, and there are those known that are apt to tell tales. And the bosun knew exactly who could help him. Jack, how are you holding up? How are the other crew members holding up? Well, if you wanted to cause trouble, Jack was your man. He was a great prospect for spreading lies. What would you expect? What were you expecting, sir? Said Jack. They're slowing down on the repairs. I know the captain wants us to speed up, but how can we speed up when there's so little fuel for the body? And what's left is all sucked up by the sun. This is not fair, sir. The bosun pulled up a stool next to Jack, agreeing with everything he had just said, and lowering his voice, he began initiating his plan. You know, Jack, this could be a curse on us because the captain's son died. That could have been avoided. The storm stopped shortly after his death, so if they had just waited a while, there would have been no danger to the ship. I'd be afraid for my life under the careless decision-making of a captain like this. Aren't you afraid for your life, Jack? A curse, you say? A curse? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Of course, that has all the makings of a curse. And with that, he began to spin a story that he could spread to all the other seamen. And just like that, Jack began to weave that tale and send shivers down the back of everyone he told. The next morning was a buzz of contention on the deck, and looks of contempt were pointed in the direction of the captain. It also, though, brought a visitor. A sea eagle had landed in the crow's nest above the main mast. The tail weaver saw this as an omen of death that he could weave into his story, that it was waiting there like a vulture to tear out the eyes of the crew one by one as they dropped from the heat, from dehydration and starvation. The navigator came out of his quarters that day with the calculations in his hand, and caught off guard, he abruptly was stopped by the cabin boy. What is it, boy? Speak up. Stepping back, the cabin boy announced, well, sir, there's talk among the crew about the captain. I thought you ought to know. Sir, they say that the ship is cursed because he killed his son. And if he could kill his son, what about us? They're saying that this is a curse, and it must come from God, because God would never give us more than we can handle. So they're saying no, that it couldn't be God, that this must be the devil. And that eagle is waiting to do us in. Without hesitation, the navigator said, oh, I believe that. The devil is definitely in this, and not in the way you think or the way the crew thinks. Well, what do you mean, sir? Said the cabin boy. The devil likes to twist things around. The Bible tells us that no temptation has overtaken us except what is common to mankind. Moreover, that God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will provide a way that you can endure. So he's talking about temptation and choice on our part, not circumstances beyond our control. What's your name, boy? Oh, my name is Will, sir. The navigator for the first time acknowledged him by name. Will, if these circumstances did not arise that are above our own strength, then we would never need God or never need someone to save us. But God, in his infinite wisdom, has chosen to test our faith beyond measure, that he might be the one way for us to turn. He who is able to do above all that we could ask or think. Therefore, Will, all of this happened to test our faith. Now, come with me to the captain. I have a small job for you. So as they crossed midship, they heard murmuring, of course. Look at the captain. He's been staring at the main mast where his son was crucified. He must know this is a curse because it was his fault. Approaching that brazen sailor, the navigator commanded the man to stop his ranting. Enough! Those words are words of tyranny. You'll find out soon who is cursed and who is not. With that decree, the sailor just slipped back into the shadows, and others scurried about their duties, pretending not to be disturbed by the day's events. Returning to his quarter, the captain closed the door behind him and smiled. Navigator, I've been studying that eagle all morning, and it brings to mind a scripture that Isaiah wrote. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Captain, I have an idea. Hesitatingly replied, Navigator, it will have to wait till next week. See you then.